Hi everyone, I'm Sanjana and I have Pradyut with me today to talk about product evangelism. Hi Pradyut, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Sanjana. Glad to be a part of your video podcast. Looking forward to adding value to the audience.
Awesome, it's my pleasure to have you on the channel and to welcome Pradyut. So Pradyut is currently the lead product marketing manager at Insider. And to be honest, I am like, not a lot of people talk about product evangelism, right? So this is so interesting. The topic is really interesting. So I'm looking forward to learn a lot from you. And without further ado, shall we get started?
Absolutely. Let's get the ball rolling.
Awesome. So let's start with an intro to what is product evangelism and like who invented this concept in the tech space. I'm just curious.
Yeah, sure. It's a common origin question. But before I get into what tech or product evangelism is all about, I just want to walk your audience through the origins of evangelism as a concept itself. So the word actually comes from the Greek word called evangelion, which basically means
Oh,
gospel or good news. So, if you've been in the throes of mythology, in the throes of following the spread of religion, you would understand that, it assumed a religious hue in the world of Christianity, which basically meant that it incorporated the act of preaching the gospel with the intention of sharing the message and the teachings of Jesus Christ itself, right? So that is
okay.
where it originally comes from. And the original evangelists or the messengers of God's messages, they went door to door talking about Jesus Christ's teachings, and then started addressing larger audiences as well, right? But let's bring that concept a little closer home to talk about what it means in the tech world as such, right? Now, in the tech space, the entire concept, the term of software evangelism was first coined by Mike Murray at Apple Computers, and this was back in the
Oh,
mid 1980s, right? And
okay.
this was specifically done with the sole purpose of competing with the reigning giants of that time, which was IBM, right? And the purpose of the original evangelists at Apple was to encourage third-party developers to actually start adopting the Macintosh platform. So that's where the story of evangelism in the tech space first started. And the first evangelist in this space was a gentleman named Mike Boyce, who was actually personally recruited by Steve Jobs himself. And
Oh, that's
Mike
nice.
Boyce, of course, then went on to recruit the most famous product evangelist that we know of on the planet Earth, who was Guy Kawasaki himself. And from there, the concept has just sort of developed. We've gone from having product evangelists to evangelists in the design space, the developer space, the tech space, etc., right? Think of the likes of Steve Jobs himself. What an amazing job he would do at the Worldwide Developer Conference every single year for such a long time. Think of the likes of what Guy Kawasaki did at Canva, taking it to a multi-billion-dollar valuation. The likes of Mudassar Zahir at HP, or even Dan Martin at Mastercard. These are legendary names in the world of product evangelism as such, right? So, what is product evangelism, right? Now, we talked about the origin. Product evangelism is nothing but about putting a human face and a voice to the brand. It's not about hard selling a product, but it's about talking about the philosophy of the brand and why you exist. So, Simon Sinek in his book, Start With Why, I'm sure a lot of us have read that.
Yeah.
He talks about the golden circle, right? So, which basically means that an evangelist talks about why a company or a brand exists. The marketing talks about the what, and the sales talks about the how. But it's the evangelists who actually explain why they exist, right? So, which means that product evangelists really need to understand the product, the market, the trends, the competitive landscape. And it's also important to understand the entire psyche of the consumer. So, very important to understand what makes your target audience tick, right? You want to also talk about as a brand, you have a philosophy, you have beliefs and motivations of why you exist, and an evangelist needs to convey that in a compelling manner to the target audience. You have to align
Okay.
your motives to their motives, and you have to basically inspire them for the reason of your existence. So that's what it is in a nutshell.
Awesome. Awesome. That's great to hear. So, Pradyut, tell me, like, what are some of the skills needed to be a good evangelist?
So I think to begin with, it's really important to understand your target customers' pain points or problems, right? Which means that having sound listening skills is really important.
Okay.
Beyond that, it's also important to have the ability to understand complex technology and make it consumable to your target audience, right? Because at the end of the day, they are not going to understand the complexities of API integration. They want to know how that product can actually add value to their lives, right? So that
Yeah.
becomes secondary. It's very important to have strong verbal communication skills. When I say verbal communication skills, it's not just one to many, but you also have to be comfortable interacting one on one, because very often an evangelist might be representing the brand at an industry event where, of course, you're delivering a masterclass or you're part of a panel discussion, but after that you might have folks who want to engage with you one on one as well. So you need to be comfortable doing that. Of course, in today's times, you need to do that both in a physical setting and a virtual setting. So being comfortable in both environments is critical. I would say copywriting and storytelling also very important, because at the end of the day, you don't just have to have great oratorial skills, but it's about building a story around your brand and your product, right? Which means that an
Okay.
evangelist will also be writing, will also be getting published on relevant industry platforms, whether it's digital or physical or in the print media, right? Presentation skills, very important. All of this, goes hand in hand. Also very important to have the ability to collaborate and work independently, because an evangelist would be sourcing information from multiple sources, both internally within the company, outside as well. They might need extra data points to make a compelling story. So very important to collaborate internally as well. And lastly, I would say it's very important for an evangelist to have that passion to share knowledge, not make a hard sell, but actually emerge as a trusted, authentic advisor. At the end of the day, it's not about closing a sale, it's about opening and developing a relationship with your target audience. So that's how I would summarize it. Those would be some of the key skills that an evangelist would need to possess.
Okay. And do they also need to build a personal brand for themselves on social platforms?
I'm glad you asked that, actually. Definitely. Because I would say that is an added bonus. Because at the end of the day, I mentioned how an evangelist needs to be the human face and voice of the brand at large. And your target audience is going to trust an authentic person, and not, and he or she is likely to trust the company handle far less, which is why building that social sort of authority across channels, be it LinkedIn, Twitter, or even for
Yeah.
that matter, other short video sharing platforms in today's times,
Yeah.
is very critical. So that's a very, very valid point.
Awesome. And like, is there a difference between a brand person and an evangelist? Are they similar or they're different roles?
So, an evangelist actually is very close to the product, which means that a
Okay.
branding person would talk more about, he would approach the entire concept of talking about the brand as such from a very different point of view. An
Yeah.
evangelist
Yeah.
is actually connecting the dots,
Got it. Got
so
it. Yeah.
going about saying that, okay, we call ourselves the world's best CRM platform, but we don't do just that. We are actually helping you understand and connect with your customers better. So the way they would approach the same story would vary.
Okay. And Like, why does, evangelism, product evangelism interest you so much? Do you have a story for us?
Yes, absolutely. So it's funny, right? So I've been in the SaaS industry for about 4.5 years now, and I started off as a pure play content writer, moved into content marketing, and then into growth and product marketing, right? So for me, the transition was, probably much easier because I've always liked public speaking. I've always liked interacting
Oh,
with audiences. So I
nice.
realized that yeah, absolutely. So I realized here's an opportunity to actually, take the content, the stories that I have been telling maybe through blog posts or webinars and, other launch activities to actually take that story in person as close to the target audience as possible. So, which is why that amazing cross pollination between being a product marketer or growth marketer and then, venturing into evangelism. So, that transition was far easier.
Got it. Awesome. And what's the difference or relationship between, being a PMM and product evangelist?
Right. So as you know, right, Sanjana, you're a product marketer yourself. A
Yeah,
product marketer is essentially building positioning and messaging, right? And at
exactly.
the end of the day, you are taking that positioning and messaging, testing it in the market. You are taking new features to beta clients and seeing whether they get traction. You're doing customer
Exactly.
marketing, right? So for me personally, even in my journey, as I mentioned, taking that same message to a much larger audience through a more personalized manner is where evangelism came into being, right? So it wasn't just about doing company led webinars. It turned into speaking at industry events, being part of panel discussions, getting published on relevant digital forums, representing the brand at community and partner led events, things like that, right? So it's very important that the larger story does not get diluted and, restricted to just your website, your technical documentation, or any of the marketing collateral that you develop. If someone is in a position to take that message to a much larger audience and actually strike a chord with them through a conversation or make humanize the entire interaction, then nothing like it. So which is why there is, this interplay between product marketing and product evangelism.
Oh, okay. Okay. So like being an evangelist, do I have to reach out to companies and influencers to spread my product story, or do I have to wait for them to reach out to me? Like, or is it both? How do you do that?
I think it would have to be a mixture of both. While you may be a custodian of the brand or a product evangelist, you can't do it all by yourself, right? Unless you build a brand all unto yourself, like a Guy Kawasaki or what Elon Musk does for the companies that he has founded, right? So it's very important to strike the right balance. Working with influencers through an outbound and an inbound approach would be the way forward, but understand that inbound approaches would be determined by the pulling power of your brand itself. So unless you're throwing money at influencers to get them talking about your brand, initially that will be the case, right? Not everyone thinks that your product is the best, or they may not have an affinity for your brand story at all. So that mix of having both an inbound and outbound approach will work, and the multiplier effect comes into play only once you continue to build a stronger brand.
So like, what are some of the key metrics an evangelist impact might be measured on?
That's an interesting story, and I have an interesting answer for that. It's very important to understand right at the onset that when it comes to the success metrics for product evangelism as such, it's really not hard coded, which means that the OKRs for an evangelist can be blurry. It really depends and varies from company to company. But broadly speaking, there are 4 or 5 success metrics, especially in the SaaS ecosystem. If you look at it, through the tech evangelism perspective, you are going to look at evangelism influenced engagement, potential lead generation, the product demos that you might book, specific feature adoption, or even direct impact on sales pipeline, right? So that's how it would work. Now, let's say, for instance, an evangelist gets published through a guest article or has a guest interview on a relevant industry platform. So the referral traffic that comes in through that particular interview back to the concerned website would be a metric that he or she might get measured on. The number of inbound inquiries that might come immediately after an evangelist presents at an industry event. So those are slightly easier to measure. But as I mentioned, there's nothing hard coded about it. It's honestly, like Guy Kawasaki said, you are not imposing like sales does. You're actually exposing your audience to your brand and larger philosophy. So it really does vary from company to company.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah. And who owns product evangelism in the company? Is it the product marketer, or are there any separate roles for evangelism in the company?
So again, it varies on the size and scale of the company. There are many companies like Microsoft or Amazon Web Services who have a dedicated role that caters to evangelism, whether to the developer community or to the product community, right? But in much smaller companies, you would have, the existing product marketer or the product head of product who doubles up as an evangelist for the product. So that really does vary.
Awesome, awesome. And like, at what stage of the company should we invest on evangelism? Is like, can early stage startups also be involved in product evangelism?
Oh, absolutely. So the thing is that evangelism is very close to, closely linked with brand building, and so which means that they're directly impacting product discovery and having an indirect impact on sales and adoption, which means that a lot of these brands sitting out of emerging markets as Europe, North America, etc., where spending power is that much more, they want to start building a brand parallelly while developing a sales pipeline. So you can definitely appoint a dedicated evangelist right at the start. You have a lot of these brands which appoint evangelists with even 2 to 3 years of experience. A company like Haptic actually has a dedicated product evangelist role, where you have fairly nascent young professionals who are close to the product and talking about it in a very compelling storytelling fashion. So it really does depend.
Okay, and I also think that CEOs could also own product evangelism at like early stage companies, right? Because they might not be able to invest on this role separately. So CEOs might take the role of evangelizing the product because they are close to the company and the product.
100%. I completely agree with you. They don't have the budgets to bring on noted evangelists in the ecosystem into their company. They are the ones who built the product or are really close to the brand, which is why very often you will see founders impose their personalities on the brand itself. Think of what Steve Jobs did at Apple, or what Elon Musk continues to do at Tesla or SpaceX, right? They are essentially spokespeople and representatives of the brand. They live it, breathe it, and take it to the market. Richard Branson of the Virgin Atlantic Group, right? So founders definitely continue to play a very influential role, but it's important for founders also to realize when to take that step back and allow a brand to take its natural course.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so let's talk about the state of evangelist roles in India, right? Product versus development.
Cool. When it comes to the state of evangelist roles in India, as you rightly mentioned, there's a clear demarcation between developer roles and product roles as well. But mind you, it's still a very nascent and emerging concept, right? We have derived it, taken a lot of inspiration from what a lot of companies in the West are doing. It's not something that comes naturally to us. We've not worked on that per se so much. So as I mentioned, right, the likes of Microsoft and AWS would have dedicated roles for the developer community and for the product community. You have the likes of event tech companies like an Airmeet or a Hubilo, companies, multi-million dollar companies that are being set up in India and scaling globally, who are setting up specific evangelist roles. So, again, an influence of them having worked with companies in the West and realizing the value of setting up that function internally. So it really does depend upon your target market, who your ideal customer persona is. We've seen the likes of, what does Freshworks do? They have a different setup for startups, which caters to startups, a different setup that caters to mid-market, and then to enterprises, right?
Yeah.
Which means that you might need evangelists for each of these different communities as such, right?
Makes
so
sense.
it is a concept that's gaining momentum, and you will definitely see more and more companies take that up on a war footing.
Awesome. And what are the different sources of information that an evangelist relies on, both internal and external information?
So as I mentioned, right, product evangelism is so much about connecting the dots, which means that before you connect the dots, you need to have the dots in place. So, getting the right information from the right teams, from the right personnel internally and from external stakeholders becomes really critical. Now, internally, a product evangelist is gathering inputs, understanding the product better, working really closely with product management, sales engineering, customer success, because you also need to understand the impact of the product on the larger market, right? So plenty of data points that are available internally to start building a more compelling story, right? From an external perspective, you're interacting a lot with your ICP or your target customer. You're also having conversations with prospects. Um, a product evangelist would also have access and should also delve into getting competitive intelligence, which means conversations on the outside, using tools like Compite internally to keep a close watch on what brands in the same space are talking about. Another key source of information becomes your channel partners and resellers also, because they're essentially an extension of your sales engine, right? And as well as I do, it's so important to gain information inputs from the analysts, the research agencies. You're looking at industry reports, the interactions that you have at events, etc. And also finally communities, because it's that singular place where you have pretty much everyone you want to interact with in a common place, and which is why that also becomes a very vital source of intelligence.
Awesome. So I think we've reached the end of the episode. So before I wrap it up, I'll the last question that I had for you is what's the one piece of advice you want to give it away to our listeners?
I would definitely encourage everyone to follow the motto of learn, engage, and grow. Because at the end of the day, if you are not an eternal learner with an evergreen learner's mindset, growth is going to be stagnant, right? When I say engage, I mean really have conversations with not just folks within your company, but expand that network, talk to folks in similar roles, slightly adjacent roles. It could be socially, it could be through physical conversations, because there is no substitute to actually learning from people on the ground. You can consume as much content as you want, like Sanjana's video.
Yeah, exactly. I was about to say that.
Right. But that's just the starting point, right? And which is why having those engaging conversations is really important. And grow is basically, I'm going to summarize that in terms of both personal and professional, because at the end of the day, all of us are chasing a dream. All of us are motivated by something that keeps us going. So as long as you have that fire in your belly and you're focused on the goals that you're chasing, nothing like it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pradyut. It was nice talking to you, and I learned a ton about product evangelism. I think I've been doing product evangelism my whole life, but I didn't know that I was actually evangelizing the product. I just thought that I was just the spokesperson for the company, but the actual term to use is evangelism, right? So I didn't know that, but good to know today. Um, so yeah, like I'll give you a LinkedIn profile in the description so people can connect with you later to learn more about product evangelism if they have any questions. Do you have anything else to add?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks,
Thank you.
thanks,
Thank
Pradyut.
you.
It was nice talking to you. Yeah, talk to you
Likewise,
again. Bye
Sanjana,
bye.
thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Bye bye.